First of all, thank you for coming today. My name is Jennifer Buchanan. I'm the Watershed Protection Director with the Mitt Watershed Council. And I do want to just let you guys know that we are videotaping today. So if there's any issues with that, let us know. But we want to make sure that we capture all the audience questions, feedback, etc. I'm going to read so that I can be as concise as I can. The purpose of today's open house sessions is to introduce the Lake Street Dam Engineering Alternative Study to the community. The study is made possible through a Great Lakes Fishery Trust grant awarded to the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. The grant was awarded June of this year and continues through May of 2020. The purpose of the study is to explore engineering alternatives for the lowermost barrier on the Bear River. The existing structure is a cast-in-place concrete gravity structure and is likely 80 years old or older. The goal of the study is to provide the city with critical information that will help direct the management of the dam while taking into account stream health, the Bear River and Little Traverse Bay fisheries, safety costs, and recreational opportunities. We will be accepting public input through October 31st of 2019. Over the winter, OHM advisors will conduct the study, which will consider the impacts to the river and bay under the following scenarios: complete dam removal, partial dam removal, modification of the dam, and no action. In May of 2020, the results of the study will be shared at a second open house. No decisions regarding the dam will be made as a result of the study. The city will, however, use the information gained through the study to inform future management of the dam. We are pleased you are here today to contribute to this process. We will have short presentations from our project partners, which should last about an hour, followed by an opportunity for discussion with presenters. Questions may be asked directly after each speaker's presentation. However, we ask that any in-depth discussion be reserved for the second hour. Please note we will be repeating this open house at 7 p.m. tonight. Thank you again. I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Heather Henninger, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, Fisheries Management Biologist for the Central Lake Michigan Management Unit. Heather's going to start, and after Heather, we're going to go to Chad with the Great Lakes. He's the Great Lakes Fishery Biologist with the Little Traverse Bay Band of the Dow Indians. And then Dr. Brian Burrows, the Executive Director of Michigan Trout Unlimited, followed by Larry Lacrosse of OHM Advisors, and then Rob, City Manager for Petoskey, will close down concluding remarks. So, thank you again. Let's go. Perfect.
Okay. So as Jen mentioned, my name is Heather Henninger. I'm the Department of Natural Resources Fisheries Management Biologist for most of Emmett County, including the Bear River. And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is kind of a brief history of kind of what the dam situation has looked like on this river in the past, what the DNR has done through the course of time as far as fisheries management, and what we continue to do today. So I thought this was kind of a cool old picture. It really kind of shows the difference between what the dam impounds now versus what it did back then. So for those of you who don't know this, so historically the Bear River here in town had 5 different dams on it. And so dam removal and issues with dams are not a new thing to this watershed. I will say, in comparison to all the other rivers in my management area, this is crazy. I mean, 5 dams in what's roughly less than a mile. And there's a significant amount of drop in this particular river system. We did an estimate in 2012. We estimated 75 feet of drop between Sheridan and the mouth. So obviously an ideal location, and folks figured that out pretty quickly. So you can see of those 5 dams, throughout the course of time, they were removed, sometimes unintentionally and sometimes intentionally, until here we are now discussing the final low head barrier on this river system. So during the course of all these dams being in place, the department has actively been doing some management on this river system through the course of time. You can see that the Department of Conservation began actually managing the system in about 1889. We stocked various species of trout, typically just brook trout and rainbow trout, in this system for about 20 years, starting in 1889. It became a little bit sporadic after that, but you can see we've stocked a number of species here. In the late 60s, when we first began our Pacific Salmonid program, we focused pretty heavily on the Bear River. We stocked coho here for a couple of years. Actually, in 1967, it was one of the first locations that we put fish. It did not go well, and that was partially because of the dam. These fish came in here by thousands, and they had nowhere to go. So it caused quite a conundrum in the city of Petoskey. We tried to operate some weirs and do some fish removals, and it was just too hectic. There was too many fish, and so we only stocked coho here for just a couple of years. We tried Chinook a few years later, thinking if we stocked less and they were bigger, maybe it wouldn't quite be such a disaster. It still was. So we only did that for a couple of years as well. So we actually have not stocked any Pacific, or I shouldn't say that. We have not stocked any coho or Chinook here in a long time, since the early 70s. But we do still stock a few other species of fish. Interestingly, we did some chemical reclamation on the system in the early 1970s. And that was kind of a time frame where we were really pushing trout streams. And in this situation, we kind of tried to make a stream that's pretty unique into a full-fledged trout stream. And the Bear River is not necessarily, the Bear River is really unique for my area. I have a ton of cold water trout streams, which are fabulous. The Bear is a little bit different. It kind of starts out as a cold water trout stream and turns transitional. So you have this really kind of interesting watershed where you've got opportunities in the headwaters for brook trout and brown trout and rainbow trout. But then as you kind of move through the system's course, you've got water that's really good for smallmouth and longnose suckers and white suckers. And then it kind of transitions back into a mix as you get closer to town. We kind of tried to wipe the slate clean and just make it a trout system, which was really kind of unfortunate. Luckily, we realized that pretty quickly, and we only did the chemical reclamation in 1973. So by 1977, we had realized that this was a multifaceted system and gone back to managing it that way. So we did a number of surveys throughout that time period, but after about 1980, we kind of didn't do much on the system, which was unfortunate. So when I took this position in 2008, this system was pretty important to me to kind of get up here and take a look at, because we hadn't done anything in a number of years. And like I alluded to, it's really an interesting system, and I think it's a system that doesn't get as much credit from us as it should. So we're trying to change that. We did a series of stream surveys in 2010 and again in 2012. We did that to kind of take a look at how this lower river looked prior to the whitewater course installation and after, to see if there were any changes. So we did 2 stream surveys. Basically, we did 3 stations between where we're at now and Sheridan Road. We did electrofishing, where we collected fish. We took scales and spines for aging, measured fish, looked at growth rates. Everything in both situations was pretty good. The one interesting thing to note was between 2010 and 2012, certain species changed in abundance. So you'll notice that there's some fairly warm water species on there, things like creek chubs and central mud minnows and rock bass. Those were primarily in the 2010 survey. Once that whitewater course went in and we saw some increases in velocity and such, we saw increased numbers of long-nosed dace, rainbow trout, and for important forage species like mimic shiners and common shiners. So the river definitely changed a little bit, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was for the worse. So we're planning on getting back in here in either 2020 or 2021 and replicating the series of surveys that we did in 2010 and 2012, just to see if anything has changed in the meantime and get back in and assess those growth rates and such. We also did some temperature data collection in 2010 and 2012. As I mentioned, this system is a little bit unique in the respect that it starts out pretty cold, transitions into a little bit warmer temperatures. All that temperature data was collected in this bottom mile of river. It's the temperature regime throughout the summer, the critical summer months of June, July, and August is really pretty good. It does get pretty close to that threshold where where the temperatures become lethal for trout. But it for the most part stays kind of right on the cusp of that. So we continue to stock brown trout at Sheridan Road. I stock 1,000. Sturgeon River, it's most of the time supposed to be Sturgeon River depending on what we have available in the hatchery. So fairly localized Michigan strain. Those fish are aimed at creating a population or a fishery in the river itself here in town. This is a really great spot to try and create a fishery from our standpoint because there's so much public access. The city has done a tremendous job with the Bear Valley Wreck area, and so it creates a ton of public opportunity. Beautiful, not overly developed water. It's really a pretty darn good location for folks to come and have pretty easy access to a trout fishery. So we continue to stock those fish there. We stock between 5,000 and 7,000 rainbow trout in the same location, right at the access point at Sheridan Road. Those fish are kind of a twofold stocking plan. They will create somewhat of a fishery in the stream when they're small. We expect them to out-migrate to Lake Michigan, as steelhead do, contribute to the fishery in Little Traverse Bay, and then at some point in time down the road, they'll return as adults and create a fishery once again in the river. Then we also stock 20,000 brown trout, wild roast strain brown trout, which are Great Lakes strain brown trout in the harbor. And the intent with those is similar to steelhead. We want those fish to go out into Lake Michigan, contribute to the Little Traverse Bay fishery, and then they'll, at some point in time in their life again, come back in the nearshore areas in the spring or run the river in the fall. Little Traverse Bay is really a unique location. We stock species to create a fishery here, but we also have naturally reproducing populations of lake trout, or I shouldn't say lake trout, some wild lake trout, but a lot of it's contributed through federal stocking. Cisco, whitefish, smallmouth bass, and then we do have natural production in some of the local tributaries and the Bear on Chinook and Coho salmon. So there really is a pretty robust fishery in this region for folks to take advantage of. In this situation, the Bear River kind of really feeds that system. It's a primary contributor for nutrients, water that feed that bay and really keep all those species that we enjoy in the bay in a good situation. So the Bear River is really a unique system. It's a big contributor, to the region, not just to the river itself, not just to the dam itself. The dam is certainly a very popular fishing location, but if we were to do something at the dam that would help native species and desired species get over that, we could really open up some mileage for fisheries in the river. We have the space and the capabilities to sustain that, and it would certainly improve some of the contributions out into the bay as well. So it's a nice opportunity to sit here and have these discussions and talk about some potential alternatives for this site. It really opens us up to some pretty nice improvements for not only the Bear River fishery, but Little Traverse Bay fishery as well.
Thank you, Heather.
Mm-hmm.
Chad?
My name is Chad LeFavor. I am the new Great Lakes Fisheries biologist with the Little Traverse Bay Band. I got tasked with this yesterday, so excuse me for being ill-prepared. Currently, a lot of our LTBB citizens access the Bear River to exercise their treaty rights, which include spearfishing and subsistence fishing, as well as a larger part of Little Traverse Bay, where we have more members that actually commercial fish as well as recreational fish. As many of you know, dams provide a concentration point for fish as well as fishermen, and our members really utilize this area to exercise their rights, and they rely on the fishery that the Bear River provides. As it stands right now, the Bear River and our tribal members, it works well for us. With that being said, if enhancements were made, I am sure that our members would follow up the river into the rapids to find the new concentration points for the fish when they're established. Other species that are important to our tribe, like suckers, salmon, whitefish, and trout, could also benefit from some fish passage modification and opening up the Bear River's habitat for spawning and rearing. Some of our main concerns, however, would have to be the sea lamprey. With currently the population of spawning sea lamprey in the Bear River is unknown, and their eggs float down the river, settle into the harbor where the young are allowed to incubate in the sediment. And I do know that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does treat the harbor every couple of years. However, that still leaves the question of how do we provide this fish passage modification while at the same time preventing the passage of sea lamprey and the invasion into the Bear River. A lesser concern would be the salmon that move up into the river. I know they can be destructive to ecosystems, but we have an interest in understanding how the contaminants will affect the further reaches upstream and how native stream fishes may be affected. So overall, the tribe is supportive of evaluating options that maybe do increase modified fish passage. At the same time, we may be supportive of modification or removal if the concerns can be fully addressed. We see it as a potential model project for addressing lowermost barriers in smaller streams. And that's all I have.
Well, hello, my name's Brian Burrows. It's nice to be with you here today. I think my goal is to try to share with some of you expectations about dams, dam removal, what you may or may not get with them. I work for Michigan Trout Unlimited, but I always think I'm asking you to trust me for a couple minutes and listen to what I have to say as I try to share some knowledge with you. So why would you do that? So background on me real quick as it pertains to whether or not you listen to me at all. Some of you don't know me for anything. So I've been working with the subject of dam removal for 19 years now. It's like one topic that I can't seem to get away from if I wanted to, and I don't really want to get away from it. It's a wonderful thing. When I started, I actually moved to Michigan, came to Michigan State University back in 2000 to study dam removals, did my master's and PhD research on trying to understand what happens when you pull them out in Michigan. And it was fun. It happened at a time when we didn't really know much. So it was a really good time. Since then, I've given a lot of lectures and participated in some fun educational stuff around dam removals. I did a stint helping the public understand and grapple with decisions about the Boardman River dams, which is a pretty big complex project similar to this, bigger, several more dams involved. And then for about 13 years now, I've been with Michigan Trout Unlimited, and that job has had me involved in dozens more, playing all different roles from managing them to advocating for them, helping to design them, whatever it may be. So, like I said, from here on out, I'm just going to tell you a few things about dams, dam removals, but hopefully maybe one of the roles I can serve here is questions later on. If you have just general questions about things that you've heard in other communities when they've grappled with it, maybe helpful. Dams, problem with dams, dam removal just keeps increasing, and it's going to keep increasing for many, many decades. So this is going to be a common occurrence for all communities in Michigan. Right now, it's still often new in different communities, but as you can see, in the United States, there's over 2.5 million large dams. In Michigan, there's over 3,000 large dams. Generally, there's a few ways to define that, but it's usually 6 feet is a good rule of thumb, 6 feet or greater in height. So the key there is that these are really the large ones that we keep track of in a dam safety database. Anytime that people in Michigan have really tried to do a more sophisticated look on the landscape, we often find 50 to 200% more of them than what's in the database. So they're everywhere. And the key why this is coming up is that most of these were designed from an engineering perspective to last about 50 years. Most of them are now past that. A lot of them in Michigan are around that 75 to 100, 120 years old now. So you can imagine that these become safety and liability issues as they age. They're getting older than they were meant to be, and what do we do then? So they were built for a lot of reasons. That's why we have a lot of them. Large gamut of reasons that they were built. Some were sawmills, log floating ones, hydroelectricity, farm fire ponds, recreation ponds, flood control, not that common out here, but a lot of reasons. And the key is that, all of us as citizens in different communities made decisions with these dams. Building them at the time provided us with benefits that we needed in our communities. As we've gone through time, though, some of those original benefits aren't provided by the dams anymore. And so what we've also learned over, say, the last 30, 40 years is that if you put up something on a river, and a whole river system is meant to flow downstream, water, nutrients, sediment, aquatic organisms go up and down, upstream and downstream. Put up a dam on it, it's going to fundamentally impact that river system. And we've done a really good job, and there's volumes of papers that explain the incredible complexity of ways that they mess with rivers. So what's upon us these days is saying, hey, we have a dam that we're not really deriving clear benefits from. There's not a clear value statement anymore. We're knowledgeable about some of the impacts. And the question can simply be, is modifying it, removing it, keeping it, what is the best decision for us right now? Not, let's hang on to it forever because our predecessors wanted it, but what is the best for us to do right now? What's going to drive us the most value? Primer Dams 101, you can click. Rivers flow downstream, upstream to downstream. You build a dam, it backs up water. Click again. This is my best attempt at graphic art. As a biology student. So, in Michigan, we have a lot of sand that comes down our rivers every year, and when you put a dam there and it lasts for decades, essentially, in most cases, our dams back up the sand. What that does, well, it does a lot of things. I won't turn this into too long of a speech about that. But it changes the water slope, sediment falls out, becomes usually wide, shallow, starts warming water temperatures, changes the physical habitat. Obviously it blocks fish too. Click again. So when we remove them, this is the ideal. This is when we're kind of in the middle of nowhere with no infrastructure concerns, and we can just remove a dam. Doing so basically allows that sediment wedge behind the dam to be eroded, starts restoring sediment transport downstream. You can click again. And eventually we end up with a stream slope that looks roughly like what we had before. When that water velocity increases, it starts restoring processes. We've learned that obviously you get rid of your water temperature impacts very quickly. You get your fish passage, aquatic organism passage. It goes through, it takes a little bit longer to get your channel shape, your width and depth of your stream back. It takes a little while to get good gravel and substrates back in some situations. What we do see, and we have seen in Michigan and throughout the country, that dam removal offers this kind of holistic restoration. And keep going, I just said that. Thanks. Sorry. So for fish, the key things that I would have you know is that one, dams and dam removal addresses these. If it changes the habitat in the river system, basically goes from being a nice flowing system to more of a lake type system. Changes all the processes, changes your aquatic community. Fish, aquatic insects, invertebrates, everything that's adapted to the stream kind of loses out in that scenario. You get species that benefit from it. So when you change the habitat back and improve it, you get a rebound of those species, you get more productivity, the numbers go up, the species composition goes up. And the other key is that the ability of fish to move in a system is critically important. So every species has a different suite of habitat needs, and that can even be different during the different ages or life stages of every species. And what happens is, all too often, when we make a river impassable to aquatic organisms, what we're asking them to do is to fulfill every need that they have in a small area. Instead of accessing an entire watershed, that this tributary over here might be great for spawning, this one might be great thermal refuge in the summer. They might want to, some species might want to go out here to the lake to overwinter better. But when we block off passage, we're asking them to deal with just what they have access to, and that usually isn't as good as having access to everything, so your populations drop. One last thing is, in the Great Lakes, there's we often think of all the nice fun sport fish, but there are dozens and dozens of species of fish that we as the public, even the angling public, doesn't ever usually get a chance to see. And a lot of those, I think research shows on average 30 or 40 of them per river system that enters into the Great Lakes. 30 or 40 species on average living in the Great Lakes needs or would benefit from river habitat for their life history, their life cycle, and often can't get that. So just here's one example. This all comes from the Pine River to the south of here, ways down in Manistee County. Before a particular dam was removed, right at the end of a long river system, we found 18 species of fish that were only downstream of the dam, couldn't not get upstream and use the rest of the river. These were the species that we found, yes, upstream and downstream, and there was only a couple that you would only find upstream. Of course, if they really want, they could go over the dam pretty easy, you could find them, but couldn't click. After dam removal, pretty simple, right? Fish swim, if you let them swim, they swim around and they access all the habitats they need. So by the time that we were done, there was only one fish that we didn't capture upstream, and it was a common carp. They were probably there, we just didn't get them. So one last thing to kind of show you what can happen by improving the habitat and letting fish swim around. Trout Unlimited likes brown trout, rainbow trout, and brook trout, salmon, and steelhead a lot. So this is again from the Pine River, what happened with the dam removal. These are brown trout trends in Michigan from a bunch of DNR surveys across the state during the time period that this dam was removed. So this is percent change. You can see that most of them are all above this zero line. So over this period of time, trout were doing pretty good in the state of Michigan, relatively speaking. On the Pine, the dam was removed around 1998. It was actually a slow removal, so it went over a couple more years than that. But this was basically the start, and the blue line is what the brown trout did upstream from the dam. They were already upstream from the dam, but the ability to have that restored habitat move around really helped. It took longer for the rainbows, but they also increased in that river too. So obviously, every situation's a little different with dam removal. There's site characteristics that matter. Some of them we get to do out in the middle of forest with no pipelines, bridges, utility lines, houses, businesses nearby. This isn't one of those situations, right? We have a lot of infrastructure here. There are options available for that, okay? And I think I would like to just quickly breeze through a couple pictures of dam removal that occurred about 2 years ago in southern Michigan that I think has some very similar characteristics that this could. And I'll just show you some imagery and a few things about that just to plant some seeds in your mind of what can be done. Small dam used to be larger, started deteriorating, concrete rotting. Dam started, had a little fish ladder that didn't really work, especially when people put shopping carts in front of it. Flood came, kind of notched it out right underneath the bridge. Key is that there was about 49 species of fish that are known to be in this river system called Prairie Creek that dumps immediately into the Grand River. And when we did a bunch of fish shocking evaluations, 42% of those were blocked by this dam and not able to get upstream. So some of the glamour ones, you're going to recognize these from this system too. You know, steelhead, salmon, brown trout, and then some of the warm and cool water species as well. But again, just to show pictures, these are just a handful of those dozens that I talked about that really need river systems and often can't get them. They're incredible. I mean, a lot of them would be great in an aquarium and we never get a chance to see them. But these are often the faceless fish that we don't think about in passage decisions.
I'm just curious, could you name them all?
Name them all? I've even forgot some of them. But there's there's some I think a redfin pickerel or a grass pickerel. That might be a green sunfish. There's a couple species of red horse suckers, a bourbon, rainbow darters, hognose suckers, some shiners, bullheads. There's a variety of stuff. It's pretty incredible. In this lake right here, trying to get in this river are dozens of fish that you probably never heard of. I mean, the suckers alone, I'm guessing there's probably maybe at least, when I say 6 species?
Yeah, in the bag, yeah.
Probably safe, round number. So anyways, these are the ones that when we were doing this project, we wanted to get all of these up the river to help, not just the ones that are great jumpers. But we had similar constraints. There was infrastructure, there was a bridge. We actually had contaminated sediments upstream, so we didn't want to start mobilizing those. So this wasn't, that ideal scenario where we pull it and let nature take its course. So one of the things that we did was we proposed to do a series of cross veins. They're just they're rock structures that we put in the bottom of the stream to help constrict flow. But the key was we had a dam there, and there was a big pool, and people liked to fish there, but we couldn't get any fish up through it. And we decided to do a series of these, and what we ended up with was about 5 or 6 sets of nice deep pools that people could spread out, fish rested in between them, but we designed them in a way that all of those non-sport fish could still find their way up through each one of those. And this just shows, this is probably too much for now, but some of these structures they work because they're directing flow. So in this case, they direct flow towards the middle of the river, away from the bank, so when you get high water, you don't get as much bank erosion. It makes a nice deep scour pool. But in the summer, when your water depth is really low, it still concentrates it all in the middle, so some of those fish can still have enough water depth to get up over these rocks. This is just a picture of what they look like in high water. You can see how it's concentrating the water in the middle. This was a picture looking upstream at that site prior. It's a collection of rock weirs that people had built, kids basically in the summer building them. They looked harmless, but we actually couldn't get fish passage over those even at a couple feet tall the way that they were working. You go ahead and click. This was an image that we used to try to help illustrate what that section of river could look like. And then you can click once more. I don't have a perfect alignment on this photo, but this is kind of from the other side looking up. That's what it looked like when we were done. So that's just just some general ideas that when you have a lot of infrastructure, there are still a lot of ways to accomplish a lot of your goals and to get a lot of ecological benefit, and improve recreation, et cetera. So obviously that's a process that we're starting at here.
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. Next, we're going to hear from Larry from OHM Advisors. The idea here, he's going to introduce us to what we're going to somewhat rely on to gain feedback from the public. Okay. Basically, it's an online survey, and this is the way to access it. We also have paper copies of that survey, but we really want to encourage people to respond to the survey questions, and at the end of October, we'll be compiling all of the feedback, and that'll help, again, inform the next phase of the engineering study.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of material from today could be added to this, so it could kind of be just this one spot that we just add more information to people use. So basically, this is just a website. It's kind of a scroll down type thing. So on the side here, and I'm just gonna kind of teach you guys how to use it because it's, like I said, just a website. If you have a mouse with a roller, it's just roll straight down. Obviously you have your bar on the side to help you get around also. So I'm just gonna use this bar on the side. And really, first off, we wanted to show people how to use or how to get to the survey. So this survey is just a button. You click here, goes to a Survey 123 site, and that site takes you to the questions that we put together for you to take. Now, on here, typically when you have a cell phone that has GPS on it, you can set your location via where you're at. So if you click on this little button here, it'll kind of show a map of the area. If you click on this button here with a cell phone or with a tablet or anything like that, it'll send you on the spot. It'll show you where you want to set your, comment. You might have something to say about a certain bend or a certain thing on the river, and you just have a general comment for that particular thing. On here, you can either use your control and roll, or you can use your plus and minus. And then it'll put you on the bear. You really want to pull on the map to set your location. If you don't want to set a location, you don't have to. So after that, you're basically just answering a couple of these questions. As you move, you're kind of just filling the bubble. And then at the end, we'll have the results from this particular survey. We'll put it all together, analyze the data, and then get that back. At the very end, you'll see just a submit sign, and that's it. In here, I just added a few. I want to make sure the sound's off on this because it can get a little loud. So I'm going to turn it down. But basically, it's just a YouTube of the actual coming over the river. So just kind of showing what it looks like when it's on the flow. Just kind of going through and just like the presentations we've seen today, we're trying to gather data and put it in a spot where people can get educated on this particular project. So throughout the project, we'll be talking about different things and a little bit of what you've heard already. Just another winter flow of the bear. And as you go through, there'll be some comments, or there'll be some different things that we've gathered about the bear. A couple more videos. The bear. You get to see some of these different spots, locations. Just a general goal. And again, this is more for just like educating you on what we're trying to do here. So bringing in some of the data that we've heard today would be great, just to beef this up a little bit. You see our project team, everybody's logo in here. And as we go through, just kind of see different pictures. On here it shows a picture of the watershed with the Bear River being highlighted in the darker blue, the other rivers in that watershed being highlighted. Just want to show you how to use this map a little bit. There's again a couple tools on here where if you get lost in the weeds here, you just click this home button and it'll take you right back to here. You can see over here is it's basically how to figure out what's on this map. So right here, we can see that the Bear River's on there, and then rivers and streams inside this watershed. Bear River watershed's the red that kind of shows that particular watershed. The kind of neat part about this story map is you can come into here and you can blow up this map, and it will get you to where you want to go. Again, you get back into using your plus and minus sign. You can click on different things like the Bear River, and it'll show you some information on the bear, or it'll show you information on these different streams or these different sections. Most of the data was brought in from the state of Michigan, so most of that data has been housed in the Michigan GIS open portal. Again, this just kind of goes through and talks about the same things we've heard from Heather earlier, just the sections. This will go over, the wetlands, and again, if you want to pop that out and look at it larger, you can click on the wetlands and see what kind of wetland that is, acreage in that section. So it's pretty intuitive. And again, just educational pieces. Here's some of the, this is the land cover that's in there. There's different types of stands inside of this watershed. And kind of pretty easy, fairly easy to use. I'm just hovering over these spots and I'll show you the different stands in that section. And on the side here, we're trying to, coincide with the mapping and educate you on different things. A couple of geology, that goes through the same, similar situation with the bear. And then it goes through a little bit of history, little thing I gotta fix there, that's kind of kicking over a little bit, I'll fix that. Again, just going through a little bit of what you heard earlier, you can see some of the same maps that Heather used. And as I'm just scrolling down, some of the history of the Dawa, a couple pictures that we got from them. And then if you see a button like this, this is going to take you to a different section. This has more information about your Dawa, so it'll take you to like a PDF of another kind that will give you a little bit more information. So again, don't be afraid if it pops you out to a different site. Then it goes through each dam and shows you the different dams throughout the system, or throughout the bear that we went over the history. And we went through each individual one, talking about Walloon Lake and the history behind that when it was built. Just real short snippets. Here we found, or this was one of the reviews that was done earlier. And if you click on it, you click on this little guy there, it'll blow up, so you can read the report in its entirety. So that talks about, McManus and how the dam was lowered, and there was lawsuits and all kinds of fun stuff to read. So it's kind of neat. In here too, you can zoom in, zoom out, those types of things. These are also interactive maps, same idea. You can blow them out, you can see the layers. Again, going through, oops, I'm sorry, going a little fast. So we have a few historic pictures from this Historic Society of these different dams. And again, I don't want to go through the whole thing, but here's a couple modern pictures of it, and just going through each individual dam and its location. So just kind of a good read, see how these different dams have been affecting or have been history inside of Petoskey. So again, just kind of scrolling through, seeing each individual one and the history behind it, when it was installed, when it was taken down. And then basically come down to Lake Street. Now, these are, again, some pictures that from the museum. Some of the, it's interesting to go through it and see how these things were built and how they came down. Different spillways, improving the bear, a couple, basically some articles that talked about the history of it. Then we get into more of the DNR stuff, where we talk about the Bear River fisheries. I do have some links to the DNR website and those types of things to take you to where, if you had any questions on species. But it basically shows the different habitats that Heather was talking about earlier. How there's warm water, cold water, and a little in between. So these are links, so if you click on these links, it'll take you to the DNR website and talk about trout. Same idea, showing you the location of the river, showing about where that's at. Took some of these pictures the other day, and then talks about how we get closer to the mouth. It kind of has a mixed use there, and some of the different pictures. And then we get into, let's see, come down. This is one of the fish stocking sites at Sheridan. And then Bear River efforts today. Basically, this is kind of showing a little bit about how the kayaking and that kind of stuff has gotten pretty popular and has been kind of one of those things that has helped the bear, and then how it's affected the bear, and then also talking about a little bit about the watersheds cleanup and how these different entities help to clean up the bear. Again, click the link to get to the paddling club's site. And then a little bit into the water monitoring, showing the different links for the watershed. So you can click on here for the web map, or it is imported or embedded here where we can utilize or click on different things in here, and it will be able to utilize it. So pop-ups, zoom in, zoom out type thing. Same idea. Then obviously another link for the stream monitoring, and then there's one that goes to the tribes. So you click on these and they'll take you to their particular site where you can get more information on the bear. And then a little bit more on the Great Lakes Fisheries. Same idea, link to their site. Just this kind of explains a little bit from the site, but just kind of a snippet where you can get more information. Then going through our grant, again, just trying to educate and help people understand what we're up to. Dam and the inspection report of the dam that was done by OHM. Again, click the button and you'll have access to the report. And then another link to take the survey. It's the same survey, but we wanted to make it accessible for everybody to use. And then just a thank you to the Historic Museum, Historic Society. So as of right now, that's what we have, and I'm assuming it probably can get beefed up a little bit with other people's presentation or information or anything like that.
Yeah, in the coming days, I think we're going to be adding to it. The survey will remain the same, so that'll be accessible. But I think, yeah, we'll be adding content. So.
I believe we're going to share this link to different sites,
Yes.
entities.
Yeah.
Jen, we'll have it on Tip and Mitt's
Yep.
website, it'll be on the city's website.
Yeah.
Are there other websites that we should be putting this up on?
Yeah.
The Dollar Tribe?
I can look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're as many places as possible.
Yeah.
And we also have some signage down at the actual structure. If you leave, you'll see has the address for this on there, as well as a QR code.
Oh yeah, QR code you can use pretty much on your phone. Like the newer phones now, you can just take a picture of it and it'll take you to the site. Or if you have a QR code on your phone, if you just shoot
Just
it.
turn your camera on your phone. And I'd never done it before, and then I did it, and like boom, it just pops up. So.
Yeah, so this should be accessible to phones, tablets,
Yeah.
everything.
Okay. Thanks, Larry. Rob, do you want to say a few things?
Sure, do we want to take some questions beforehand, or?
Whatever. Sure.
Yeah, why don't we open it up to questions
Yeah.
and then we'll summarize. So are there any questions for any of the presenters or just in general?
Well, I might ask, I mean, the city owns the dam, has responsibility for the dam.
Correct.
And it's basically our gig, huh? I mean, it's,
It is, I think, final permits would have to be achieved through different state agencies. Maybe the federal government would have to approve the ultimate design of this, but by and large, it would be ultimately, city council would make the decision on how to proceed forward.
The removal of the Maple River Dam, in my opinion, was successful. The drawdown was slow. How would you, this is much smaller, with removal of pieces, but how would you repair those, or how would you put those in
Yeah, great question. Brian or anybody else, do you want to chime in? Did anybody have any experience in breaching that dam then, or?
I'm generally familiar, I think Heather is too. Everyone's a little different. That one was larger, and the sediment management needs of it was quite a bit different. I think this one, well, I would say that this will just probably look a lot different, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good way to characterize it. I mean, this is a little bit of a unique situation in that, and so Prairie Creek was a really good example to use, because up here, we've dealt with some pretty large, pretty high head hydro facilities. This one's a little bit, like Brian alluded to, it's a little bit smaller, a little bit less infrastructure involved. So I don't know that there's a great way to compare it to the Maple, or even really a system up here that we've done a dam removal on that we can compare it to.
I mean, some of them up here are, a little bit bigger systems, bigger dams, bigger flow, bigger sediment issues, and very little infrastructure to deal with, and you kind of approach those very different. The fact that this is very much constrained and downtown is all around it, that will drive, a lot of the alternatives that are possible. So I think it would probably be its own kind of complexities, but probably not quite the big sand or sediment management issues that one.
Yeah.
Well, from this side of the road to the lake, there's a lot of rock, although not road, rock. Will that be totally reconfigured?
I wouldn't envision changing downstream at all. And the changes that we'd see if it was removed would be from where it's at up. And that would be accomplished between the Lake Street Bridge and the Highway Bridge. We would want to contain the impact of that.
Yeah, as far as the riprap, or very large rock material, it's one of those things. There's not a lot of room between that and the buildings and the river, so there's not a lot to work with. But what I would say is, I know these folks are out doing a lot of intense surveying, and in the work to come, that surveying will really be the basis of figuring out the alternatives and the adjustments that are made. So I wouldn't jump ahead of knowing what those survey results are, but if you various forms of modifications, grade controls, dip rock rams, all different things that are available, you really have to figure out how much head you have to work with, and then you got to start kind of saying, okay, well, can fish pass this, that? Which ones do we want to pass? Which ones don't we want to pass? And then you start designing alternatives based off of all those numbers and variables that you're working with. And so, you probably can't afford to mess with the banks too much, but maybe some of the rock configurations that you see out there today may need to be modified. My guess.
Yeah, so at this time, we're in the beginning phases of, we'll build a computer model of the stream from the highway bridge down to the mouth of the stream. So we can put all those in, model the impacts of all the different things that we're looking at.
Other questions? Susan?
I think you answered, that question was pretty much mine. I was curious to know what kinds of the infrastructure would actually be affected. I mean, I know the stream pretty well, but I can't really imagine what would happen. So could you give us like some kind of a broad outline of what would be affected?
I'd be glad to. I don't want to.
No, go ahead.
So, generally in this case, I think about the river laterally out to the sides. There's not a lot that you can do there. As we get upstream a little bit further, there might be a little bit. Think about the design alternatives coming more as affecting the river up and down, vertically. We could end up, some of the alternatives could be, from that bridge up there all the way down to the lake. We may say that you need 15 structures that step things down gradually. It could be 5 structures. It could be, one. Those are all options with the surveys. But yeah, because we're, locked into a downtown, you can often hope to redefine the bank shape, but in a downtown situation, that's probably gonna be somewhat limited. There may be certain components in certain places where a little bit's possible and talked about and discussed, but generally, think of it more of adjusting the slope of the river.
Back upstream. Okay. Thanks.
One question I had was, Brian, you talked about the number of species that are going to swim up the river. And I'm wondering about competition for habitat and how that all balances out with what you said, could be dozens of different species. Does Mother Nature just kind of do her job and there's a balance that's created there, or how does that all work?
I wish I knew completely. I've studied it, and I'm so far from having all of the answers.
Yeah.
If you let everything go, then yeah, I mean, in complex ways that we really don't even understand, they do compete. And little tiny differences in how much silt there is compared to gravel, or how much cobble, all of those can mean the difference between, a trout perch winning out or white suckers winning out. Whether you can add a ton of species at no cost to certain ones that are there, or whether you may dip a little bit in certain ones that are there. I see it. We wish that we understood it really kind of quantitatively at a more predictive level. We have general information and general things that we can rely on, but it's still pretty complex. The best way I can tell you is that, again, the Pine River is one that I studied for 6 or 7 years. And I got to watch a lot of different species start moving upstream from the dam. And there was brown trout, brook trout, rainbow trout, sculpins. There was a community already there. In that particular river, the way it played out was that those species that were there, they increased because of the habitat. But the species that needed access to it, they increased too. And it didn't seem at that river to be any cost of adding new ones. They all kind of used it in really cool and different ways. I could go on about it, but that is a concern. And obviously with fish passage and Great Lakes, what it often comes down to is we want to get those 3 dozen on average species that need this river that are native. We want to get them up the river. We also want to get our sport fish up and down the river so that we can enjoy those more. And then there's typically about one fish that throws a monkey wrench into getting all of that, and that's the lamprey. When we don't want a lamprey, we don't have a plan for getting everything that we want, that are poor jumpers, up a river and keeping lamprey out of the sun. So that becomes a real weighting issue. And again, for that one, not to dive too deep into it, but it's a choice. If you're told that you can keep lamprey out or keep them out of a certain amount of river, or you can let a whole bunch of fish that we all want to see thrive get up a river too, you can wait it. And there's a lot of conversations. You can say we're going to let everything go in the entire river, and we're going to have to deal with lamprey treatment costs. You can say we're going to let them go halfway up the river and use some other kind of a natural barrier to try to keep them out from there, use an inflatable or a seasonal thing, minimize the cost of treatment and get some fish up into valuable sections of the river. It could be from either nothing or everything or something in between. And it's really it's your community and it's DNR and the tribe and the Fish and Wildlife Service, everybody trying to hear and honor each other's objectives and goals and try to come up with the best win-win strategy. But I believe there's always a good optimal option choice there.
Right. In the community that the Pine, were there any notable changes in the anglers, how they use the river, anything like that that you might we could anticipate if the structure here was?
I would actually say, so the Pine's probably not that informative. It's a pretty lightly fished river.
Okay.
Everybody was really happy because the trout increased by 300 or 400%. Nobody was really going in there and targeting some of the suckers in the walleye and the pike that occasionally came up the river. On prairie in there during the short season of fish runs, mostly steelhead on that river more so than salmon. And what we tried to do was to honor the fact that people liked fishing there in that section, and at the same time that we were going to pass fish upstream. They weren't going to sit there for 4 weeks. They were going to sit there for a couple days, but there was resting holes, and so the public generally really liked that. Now, instead of being shoulder to shoulder in one plunge pool, they had 6 or 7 deep pools that they could all spread out and fish. And we were worried about how that would go for a while, but in reality, people still fish it. But people have started spreading out and fishing on river more so than ever.
And I think here too, we have a unique opportunity to change angler behavior in a positive way. And Officer Leclerc can probably attest to this, but that situation of angling that we've got here in town right now isn't necessarily ideal from the department standpoint. You see a lot of poor angling behavior, and salmon fever is a real thing, and sometimes it brings out the worst in folks. And so by potentially getting rid of a concentration point and forcing folks to spread out and fish using appropriate angling methods, we actually have potential here to reinvent the fishery in a more positive direction without some of the poor behavior that our conservation officers and local police are currently dealing with.
Heather, you talked a little bit about the temperatures of the Bear River and the different velocities.
Yep.
You know, it's a little bit more rapid up around Walloon Lake, and then it kind of widens and
Yep,
slows
flattens out a
down,
little bit,
flats
yep.
out. And there's certainly some areas of higher sediment that I see, you know, just a half a mile up. If you look, you know, where the Bridge Street Bridge is, you know, basically from there on up, it's very slow, very placid, a lot of sediment on the bottoms. By taking out the dam, would you increase the velocity of the water in the more placid areas, therefore scouring the bottoms, and the temperatures might drop a little bit where you could sustain a better trout fishery through there? Or?
Potentially, and we'll have to see what these guys come up with when they go through and model this. You know, we already have a system that's pretty steep, and so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with as far as how far upstream that's going to downcut. But there is that potential. It's some of that stuff in the middle we probably won't see a ton of change with. A lot of that stuff from Bridge Street up toward Walloon has to do with groundwater input and hydrology and how that section of the river carves through the landscape. So would we see a dramatic change in temperatures or bottom composition through there? Realistically, no. Could we potentially see some length of change in that Bridge Street corridor? Potentially. The temperature work that we did was we had a temp monitor in at the 131 bridge, we had one at the pedestrian bridge on the path, and then we had one at Sheridan. Of those three, the pedestrian bridge was typically the coolest. You know, down at the 131 bridge, there is a little bit of impounding there, and as Brian showed in his graphic, you know, you get that sediment input there and things slow down, so that's expected. The pedestrian bridge is right through the middle of that high gradient section, so it was cooler on average, again expected. And then once you get up towards Sheridan and Bridge Street and such, you start to lose gradient, it flattens out again, sediments change. It's not as well shaded through there either, so you get some contribution to that temperature too. But I think, and I'll have to go through it again, I just looked at it the other day, I think August, we got up to around 72 degrees at the two warmer probes, and it was like 67, 68 at that probe in the middle. So still approaching upper thermal limits for trout species, but still a decent place for species like brown trout to hang out. We do see brook trout through here periodically. Most of our brook trout are higher up in the system. I don't think we would see huge impacts, but, you know, like, and Brian and I have said this a couple of times, you know, every dam removal is different. Sometimes you don't expect a change, and the Boardman was a great example. We took the highest dam out in that system, and we expected to see cooler water temperatures. You know, when we did all of our modeling and estimates, you know, we came up with 5 or 6 degrees cooler in the summertime. When we actually put a probe in and looked at things, it was 8 to 9 degrees cooler on average. So you know, sometimes, you know, you have the best science and you try to kind of make some educated guesses, and you're pleasantly surprised at what happens in the end. So hard to say, but that middle stretch of river has a lot to do just really with the landscape that it cuts through.
Excellent. Well, thank you, folks. I just want to recognize the presentations of Brian and Heather and Chad and Larry, and certainly thank Jen Buchanan. She is the person that's kind of ushering this all together. It's a pretty heavy lift bringing multiple partners together on the restoration of the Bear River, but Jen's doing a fantastic job, so thank you, Jen. If we can give a quick hand to everybody. I cannot reiterate enough that this is a publicly driven process whereby we're very much seeking out public comment in what is the ultimate design for the Bear River. So please get on the website and peruse some of the information. Larry, I think you did a fantastic job. Really interesting website. We will have paper copies of the survey down at City Hall if you don't want to get on the websites and use the internet, if that's more your cup of tea. Please keep in contact with us, and we appreciate your attending tonight. There is another session tonight. If you're really into this stuff, you can come at 7 p.m. But thank you so much for your attendance. We appreciate it.
And if you want to take one of these,